Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. OSU scientists will be paying close attention to the Super Bowl this weekend. We'll tell you why a little bit later in the show. But first, we're talking forage options other than wheat that you may want to consider now. Here's Dr. Alex Rocateli.
So last year by September was the time that producers were planning on seed some wheat for forage, but unfortunately we were in a drought condition, so some producers really delayed to put the wheat on the ground. And after, with sudden and soon low temperatures, what happened is wheat pastures didn't develop well, or even in some cases producers even give up on placing a wheat pasture. Something now that producers might be wondering is there a plan B that I can still produce forage for the spring? And the answer, yes, we have, and that would be spring oats. Producers can plan on planting spring oats from mid-February to early March. And that can provide like forage for 35 to 60 days depending on the weather. Oats has a similar or even superior quality forage than wheat, so on that end we are going to be good, but expect a little lower yield than wheat. We are talking about 1,500 pounds of forage to 2,000 pounds, 1 ton of forage per acre. When plant oats, that's the trick. If you are putting oats in a field that you have fertilized and managed to plant wheat and your wheat field failed, pretty much all the fertilization that you place there is still there, so you may not need to fertilize. In this case, you just go and you can no-till your oats. In this case, oats can be no-tilled to a depth of 1.5 inches. However, for a fast emergency, we recommend about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, so it can start to grow faster. If you are planning to graze oats, well, you can start grazing oats when the plants reach about 6 to 8 inches, but height is not the only way to check. It's a good idea that you go there and you try to pull the leaves in the field. When you're trying to pull, mimicking the animal trying to graze, if what comes to your hand is the leaves detach, but the roots stay in the ground, means that the plant is well anchored and you can start to graze. If in that time still you're pulling the plants and the roots are coming out with it, well, better that you delay a little bit to start grazing. Otherwise, you can lose all your oats and it's not going to have any regrowth. And stop grazing when those plants are about 3 inches height. So it still can have some leaves there for photosynthesis and a good regrowth. Now, if you plan going for haying, the best time for haying is when the plants are reaching the bud stage to heading. Because at that moment, we already achieved the happy medium point. We have a great and high amount of forage there, and the quality is still good for growing animals. So that's the time that you can have a very good yield for hay. So that's pretty much some tips here on oats, but if you want to know more in details, I invite you to check our fact sheet, and also talk to our educators in your counties. They are the best resource to help you find the best varieties and more details in the management.
Welcome to the Mesonet Weather Report. I'm Wes Lee. After such an extended drought, it is nice to see some saturated soils in at least parts of the state. Rainfall that started at the first of last week dropped from 1 to over 5 inches in areas south of I-44. Lighter amounts were recorded in the 1 or 2 counties north of that line. But unfortunately, no rain was recorded in the driest parts of the northwest and panhandle regions of the state, at least as of Wednesday afternoon. Where heavier rain amounts occurred, we have actually moved above normal for the calendar year. Our soil moisture maps show in detail where rains fell and areas that were left out. At 10 inches, this fractional water map shows green where moisture is good and yellow or brown where moisture is lacking. 1 year ago, the same map looked a little worse, with more western counties showing deficits. But focusing on the Panhandle illustrates how severe this continuing drought has been for them. At our deepest sensor depth, you start to see a larger area of the Northwest where deep infiltration is needed before summer planting season. The good news is we seem to be getting more wet weather chances lately, and more rain is forecasted for the early parts of next week. Now here's Gary with some moderate changes to the latest drought map.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, some great rainfall amounts across the southeastern half to 2/3 of the state, not so much across the northwestern third. How does all this impact the new drought monitor report? Well, not quite as good as we think. Let's take a look. Really the same basic drought monitor map we've had over the last few weeks. We did have a little bit of improvement down in far southeastern Oklahoma, where we went from D0 to D nada, or no drought or no color at all. But we also had a little bit of increasing drought up in the far western panhandle as we went from D3 to D4. Now, the problem with the drought monitor map when it rains after Tuesday at 6 a.m. is that cannot be considered for that week's drought monitor map. So that will go on next week's drought monitor map. So those areas that had 2, 3, 4 inches of rainfall since Tuesday morning will see vast improvements as we get into next week's map. It's also improved our 30-day map. This is the 30-day rainfall map from the Mesonet. We see again that southeastern half to 2/3 of the state, 1 to 2 to 3 inches of rain. Then we get down into the far southeastern corner. We get 6, 7, 8 inches of rain. Close to 9 inches in some cases. So the rainfall definitely tapers off from southeast to northwest, but some drought quenching rainfall across the southeastern half of the state. That shows up quite well on our percent of normal rainfall map for the same time frame, the last 30 days. Above 100% of normal and even close to 200% of normal in some areas. Again, mostly across that southeastern half of the state. Much worse up in the panhandle where they're less than 50% of normal, but some cases less than 25% of normal for the last 30 days. So the haves and the have-nots, unfortunately. When we go back 6 months, that 180-day rainfall map from the Mesonet shows, again, pretty much the southeastern half of the state in much better shape than the northwestern half. Not really shocking to see this map, but when we go to the percent of normal rainfall map for that same time frame going back 180 days, we do see again though that most of the state is still below normal, at least going back to August 12th. So we have several different drought periods going on impacting our drought picture. So the great rainfall amounts that we've seen across the southeastern half of the state, they really do need to start to spread into the northwestern half so we can really start to curtail that drought up in that part of the state. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
First hollow stem is almost here, and as Dr. Eric DeVuyst tells us, grazing your cattle past this crucial stage of development could seriously impact your bottom line.
You know, with forage really tight right now coming out of winter, there's a temptation to graze that wheat as it's taken off and we know it's just about ready. You can just see it's ready to jump out of the ground or take off the short wheat. If we get some more rain like today, we get some heat units, it's really going to grow. Somewhere around March 1 every year we get first hollow stem depending on temperatures and what part of the state you're in. And so here's this temptation. Maybe I should run some cows or heifers out there or to keep some stockers out because gains weren't what I wanted. But there's 2 studies that were done in Oklahoma on extended grazing that show that's a really bad idea economically. There was a study from Fieser et al. Who showed just 1 day of extended grazing reduced wheat grain yields then by 1%. But the Fieser study needs to be taken with a little bit of caution. They were grazing stockpiled forage, meaning the wheat was really tall, it hadn't been grazed. Where when we look at the paper, a study by Redmond et al., they show more punitive losses from extended grazing. Just 1 day of extended grazing, Redmond et al., and their study was on more conventionally managed pastures. They show a 5% loss in grain yields. So if we go back to the Feeser study, that equates to, after we take into account the gains that the stockers put on, about a 90-cent an acre loss, which isn't horrific. But when we look at the Redmond study, that one-day loss is $11.40 an acre for a 35 bushel wheat at $7.50 with $1.40 in the value of stocker gains. If we're being conservative and trying to make good, sound financial decisions, we need to be pulling cattle off at or even before first hollow stem. So if we continue that, we continue to graze past first hollow stem, it gets even worse. The Feeser et al. Study showed a 3% loss in wheat grain yields, where Redmond et al. Showed a 15% at 3 days. At 7 days, it's even worse. Feeser, 6% loss, about $4 of lost profit, but the Redmond et al. Study, a third of the grain yield was lost, and that translates to about $75 an acre loss in terms of economic returns from grazing just 7 days past first hollow stem. It's just not a good idea. Be checking that wheat, pull those cattle. Don't take the losses.
For a link to that new fact sheet, just go to sunup.okstate.edu. We're joined now by Dr. Kim Anderson here at Foundation Seed. Kim, the February WASDE is out looking at supply and demand numbers. Were there any surprises?
There weren't any surprises in this report. The numbers came in right at expectations. Minor changes on corn, wheat, beans, cotton. All the reports were just almost exactly what we had in the January report.
With that kind of steadiness and no surprises, what is your wheat price outlook?
The price outlook's about what we've been expecting over the last couple of months. You could look at the harvest prices that you can forward contract for. Wheat up in northern Oklahoma, Medford, Pond Creek, around $8.15. If you go to the Panhandle, you add a nickel to that. You go down in southern Oklahoma, Snyder, you'll take off about 50 cents. And if you're going to Weatherford and north in that area right in there, probably take off 25 or 30 cents. You look at corn prices, $5.70, of course higher in the Panhandle area. That $5.70 is overall for Oklahoma. Looking at soybeans, just under $13, and cotton, it's just been staying at $83, somewhere in that vicinity over the last month or so.
So looking at wheat specifically, how much is that forward contract price due to the pandemic and then of course Russia's war with Ukraine?
Of course with the COVID, I've said that we've took prices from around $4.50 up to $8. Then the war last February, I took it from the $8 up to over $13. It's backed off. I think we've got most of the COVID impact out of the market. But I think there's the Russian-Ukraine war with the amount of wheat and the little bit of corn coming out there, they're definitely going to have an impact on prices. Now, what you can look at is the average annual U.S. prices and the ending stocks-to-use ratios, and look at that relationship, and that should tell you and show you the impact of extraneous forces on prices. You go back to 2012 for the average annual price, around $7.77. The stocks-to-use ratio was 24%. You can go in mid, about 2016, you had $3.90 for an average annual price, 55% stocks-to-use ratio. So you're looking at exactly offset relationship between stocks-to-use ratio and price. You come back to now, it's 30%, and this year's price is projected to average around $9.10. You go back to, again, 12 and 13 with 24 and 30%, you had $6.50 to $7.70 prices. So that tells you that, from around 7 1/4 to 9.10, or if you want to look out to harvest, 8.25. There's about $1 to $1.50 impact in prices, higher prices because of the Russian-Ukraine war. And I think that's what we got to watch as we're going out in the future, watching that war and watching how the product moves out of that Black Sea area.
I think it's already lasted a lot longer than anybody thought that it would.
Oh, you bet. Russia, and I think it's just common knowledge, Putin thought that he could go in and take that country in a couple of months at the most. There are no expectations for a quick result from that war. Right now, it looks like it's going to go on for a while.
So with all these numbers and all of these other factors in consideration, how should producers market their crops?
Well, in that war's not expected to end anytime soon. I think you just ignore that impact, take that dollar increase in prices, probably a 30 or 40 cent increase in corn prices. I wouldn't do anything until I got closer to harvest. Our big problem right now is the drought, is the poor quality of our wheat that's in the ground, and our uncertainty of yields. I think price is going to take care of itself. Yields is what we got to be concerned with.
Okay, Kim, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Good morning, Oklahoma, and welcome to Cow-Calf Corner. This week's topic is it time to reprogram your cow herd? Now, for the past week, those of us in Oklahoma and a lot of surrounding states, and even going back for a few years, a lot of the United States has dealt with some pretty severe drought. As a consequence of that, in many cases, we find ourselves at reduced cow inventories. We've went through culling methods and eliminated cows that were open, old, ornery, had some kind of an issue. And so we're sitting here at a point in time when, if cow inventories are low, with the anticipation of maybe returning to normal rainfall patterns, returning to normal growth of warm season grasses, we're figuring we're probably going to restock with cows. And when I talk about this being an opportunity and potentially reprogramming that cow herd, I encourage producers to take a look at some of the performance levels that they've seen in their cows over the past few years. Maybe even take a look at some of those things that led to some of those cows that were culled over the past 12 months to be eliminated from their cow herd. And whether it is a fertility issue, a mature cow size issue, maybe it's a lack of milk or too much milk. Maybe it's a lack of performance and growth, and we need to improve upon some of those things in those calf crops relative to when we're marketing those. This is a time, as we think of the bull buying season that we've got approaching us in the next few months, to actually seek out some genetics that are going to improve upon those things and lead to a cow herd that acts as a production factory for us in our cow-calf operation, that we're going to see fit our environment a little better, maybe take a little less feed supplementation, calve on a consistent and timely basis, and yield us a calf crop that returns against that investment that we make in the cow herd and our cow-calf operation. So, as I always say, tough times and droughts can make us better managers if we learn from what's going on and permit those lessons to help us be better managers. At this point, if you see yourself restocking, taking on more cow inventory, or just regrowing from within, whether it's looking at any of those things relative to the cows or bred heifers or pairs you're purchasing, or specifically addressing things in your bull purchases that are going to lead to profit potential, look at this as opportunity and reprogram that cow herd for profit potential at some point down the road. As always, thanks for joining us on Cow-Calf Corner.
OSU Extension supports Oklahoma farmers and ranchers with mental health resources and programming. If you or someone you know is experiencing mental health challenges, call the Comprehensive Crisis Response Lifeline at 988, or go online to the OSU Extension website dealing with farm stress For more information about local resources, suicide prevention, finances, disaster recovery, and more, we have links to both of these websites at sunup.okstate.edu.
So now that we're into the first of the year, we're starting to get a few more minutes of daylight every day. And this is the time of year that chicken enthusiasts like my wife, they get excited about possibly getting some new chicks. And the other thing that as we get more daylight hours, that those old hens that are still out there in the backyard will begin to lay again. If you're going to be purchasing some new chicks this year, I would highly recommend that you use a reputable hatchery, preferably one that's on the National Poultry Improvement Plan. This will give you at least some confidence that you won't bring some disease home that could infect your entire flock. The other nice thing about reputable hatcheries is they have the ability to vaccinate those chicks. The other thing is if you don't have a biosecurity plan in place, you need to have one. This is our only protection against certain diseases such as avian influenza. And if you've looked at the news or heard anything about avian influenza this year, it's been a major problem in Europe and Asia. So make sure you have that biosecurity plan in place with your chickens. The last thing I like to talk about, and I seem to talk about this every year, is salmonella infections associated with backyard poultry. 2020 was a record year for the number of salmonella infections we had with people that had backyard chickens. Over 1,700 people were infected. 333 of those people had to be hospitalized, and one person actually died from the disease. What's really troubling is almost 25% of those cases were in children under the age of 5. Children need to be supervised when they're around chickens. You don't want to eat or drink around chickens, and you don't want to bring chickens into your house.
Finally today, millions of people will be tuning in this Sunday for the Super Bowl and cheering on their favorite team. But here at Oklahoma State, we're also cheering for the turfgrass team. Oklahoma State University's Turfgrass Research Center is once again in the national spotlight, this time for Super Bowl 57. Tahoma 31, developed by OSU scientists, was selected for the playing field at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona.
Turfgrass breeding program really has focused on developing varieties that are tough.
Tahoma 31 is also resilient, has a fine texture, darker green color, and can handle drought, cold, and shade. Plant breeder Dr. Yanxi Wu is on the turf development team.
Not many Bermuda grass sees a shade tolerance, but this Tahoma 31. So all these components put together make this grass is robust in many aspects. So adapted to many locations.
A new turfgrass variety takes 10 to 15 years to research and develop. The extensive testing takes place in the greenhouse, the lab, and in the field, and can include more than 1,000 experimental plants. The best variety is then patented and released commercially.
We have no involvement in the selling of the product itself. It's just simply the development of it to really try to solve specific problems. So let's say, for instance, this year we had a very tough drought year. And so we have some grasses that have some specific characteristics that really handle the drought very well, like perhaps an enhanced root system. And so those are the kinds of characteristics that a breeder is looking for.
Royalties from the patents come back to the university for further research. Dr. Dennis Martin is an OSU Extension turfgrass specialist on the team.
So the grass is performing, and as long as it continues to perform, I think we'll see it on those facilities. And at the same time, we've got the next generations of materials in the pipeline that are experimental to be rolled out.
Turfgrass breeding programs were originally developed in order to develop forages for cattle and sheep for food production. But in the process, we learned a lot about how grasses behave and different kinds of grasses. And lo and behold, it turns out Bermuda grass is a tremendous grass for playing surfaces.
And great for advancing science.
Very proud when you start thinking about the reach that we have for our turf grass. We have it in Soldier Field, but we also have it at Churchill Downs. We have it at the Capitol Building in Washington, D.C. And then to have it in 2 playoff games, 2 different ones, and then the Super Bowl, I don't know if anybody could ever claim that they had plant material that people were playing on and the performance of that. That's really astounding.
Bottom line, even though the game has yet to be played, Oklahoma State is already a winner. That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can see SUNUP anytime on our website and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next time at SUNUP.